Welcome, everyone, to our session today. Glad to have you with us. I'm Cindy C. Segoy, the Executive Director of the Cleveland 2030 District. We put on some education sessions throughout the year, and in the summertime, we add a few one-hour special sessions. And so today's session, we have Dr. Jason Wood with us, the Chief of Sustainability of the City of Cleveland. I won't read his full bio. You were provided with that beforehand, but we're just so pleased to have Dr. Wood with us today. We're going to talk about the plans for the City of Cleveland, what they're doing in the Office of Sustainability, and all that's new and things that are coming up in the city that we should all know about. So, Dr. Wood, thank you very much for being with us today. Let me go through just a few housekeeping items before I turn it over to Jason Wood. The summer sessions for this year, we are going to have a session in July in collaboration with the Ohio Environmental Council. Actually, since I created this slide, we did come up with a date. It will be on July 21st from 5:30 to 7. It will be a Meet the Mayoral Candidate session, completely nonpartisan, as a 501c3, we certainly do not endorse any particular candidate. This is strictly for the community to meet all of the candidates. And then we will have a session probably in July on the state environmental policies, and then another one probably in August on federal environmental policies. And then, of course, I will direct you to our website for all of the education sessions that we normally hold throughout the year. We'll take your questions at the end of Dr. Wood's presentation through the chat function. So please type your questions into the chat. We are providing continuing education credits for this session, and at the end of the session, I'll send out a sign-in Google spreadsheet for you. And I'll also send out a really quick survey just to gauge your interest in some other topics and tell us why you like these sessions or what we can do to improve these summer sessions. So with that, Jason, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to share.
Excellent. Thank you, Cindy. Let me get it all loaded up here. The awkward transition from one presenter to the next. No, I'm really excited to be here today to kind of talk a little bit about some of the way that we're trying to set Cleveland's sustainable future up to move forward. There we go. I don't think it's any secret to this group that we have a pretty long and substantial history of sustainability in Cleveland. If we look back over the last 10 years, we've really been able to do a lot of really good work here in Cleveland, whether it's through our Sustainable Cleveland initiative or other things that we've done in our office. We've really been able to engage a large portion of our population. So we've engaged about 15,000 people. And I think have really set the foundation for sustainability and have helped us move towards this goal we have of becoming a green city on a blue lake. As we wrapped up the initial 10 years of what we thought of as Sustainable Cleveland 2019, we really hit that natural point to kind of rethink what our sustainable future held. And this was really one of the first conversations that Mayor Jackson and I had after I kind of accepted the job as the Chief of Sustainability. And as he and I kind of talked through what we thought this future should look like, we thought about several challenges. And hopefully you'll see kind of how these have influenced the way that we're pursuing our work moving forward. First, we wanted to think about how do we continue the momentum that we have built as a community through that initial 10-year period. We wanted to begin to think a little bit about how do we organize everything that we have to do in a way that helps us create healthier, thriving, and resilient neighborhoods, because that's where a big portion of our focus is on that neighborhood level kind of activity. And then how do we do all of this in a way that improves the quality of life for all of our residents? So how do we do this in a way that really helps us advance equity as a key priority as we look to the future of what we see? This kind of approach has us working on a whole lot, right? So we've got a lot of activity going on around clean energy, energy efficiency, green spaces, trees, waste, transportation. So a whole host of different activities that are ongoing. So we really kind of thought about how do we organize this discussion. So Cindy kind of approached me about doing this. We started to kind of talk through what do we want to go through today? What do we need to share to really make this an effective use of 20 to 25 minutes of conversation before we get into the Q&A. And what we settled on was really to look at 3 of the big ongoing projects we have that are really critical to helping us build on that foundation and hopefully setting us up for a future sustainable pathway in Cleveland. Each one of them is critical in its own right, but when you kind of take them all together, what we're really looking to do is create this comprehensive approach to the actions that we need to take locally, that we can make Cleveland that green city on a blue lake that we want to start with. So let's kind of start with the Lead for Cities. We really, as we kind of set out on this initial pathway, we needed something new to aim for, right? So much of the Sustainable Cleveland 2019 was anchored to that 50th anniversary of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire for the last time. And we had used that as really a target to kind of celebrate the progress that we had made revitalizing the river and our overall natural environment, and then also kind of set off on the work that was necessary to continue that progress as we work to make Cleveland a better place to live, work, and play. As we thought about what our new goal should be, what should this new target that we're aiming for be, we really kept coming back to that vision statement that we just looked at that focuses on creating this green city on a blue lake. We wanted to think of this as an opportunity to bring something to the table that would help link all of the ongoing work that we had, but would also begin to allow us to benchmark performance and maybe measure our progress a little bit more effectively. So as a result, we set what's a pretty aggressive goal of becoming a LEED Platinum city. I'm sure most of the folks on this call are familiar with LEED for Buildings. And this is just essentially the USGBC's quantitative and qualitative approach for cities and communities, right? It works in much the same way as LEED for Buildings. It's a numeric scale, it's got prerequisites, it's got credits. And it really is a tool that we can use as a community to help guide us to become more sustainable, more equitable, and more resilient. Those are kind of the big legs of this effort that we're looking at. So far, about 100 cities have certified. I think we're still a little under 20 have received that platinum certification. So it's a very high bar to get over. We like LEED for Cities for a couple of reasons. First, it gives us this kind of holistic look at how we're doing. It blends information specific from city operations, but it also brings in data from the broader community perspective. So we're capturing that full kind of assessment of all of the activity that's happening in Cleveland, whether it's government, nonprofit, corporate, institutional in some way. So it really brings things together. I think the other big reason we like LEED for Cities is its focus on improving quality of life. Just based on the scoring structure, it is very, very difficult to reach that platinum certification without tangibly improving the quality of life for residents in our community. You get the points that you get for having the right policies in place and increasing programmatic efficiency, and all of that is important. But at the end of the process, if we aren't making things better for the people that we serve, we're not going to get where we want to be. We also like LEED for Cities because it lines up with a lot of our existing efforts, including our climate action plan. And this alignment was really important to us as an organization. The CAP really reflects the community's priorities around sustainability. When we updated it in 2018, the community came together and invested a lot of time and energy and passion in updating the climate action plan. It kind of went through this community-focused and inclusive process. And we were able to really develop a set of focus areas and objectives that reflect the overall sustainability priorities of our community. And we thought that it was really important that we respect that process as we looked at setting this future goal. We took a hard look at that alignment when we made this decision. And what we saw is that there is a tremendous amount of alignment between the CAP focus areas and the prereqs and the credits and LEED for Cities. So we felt pretty comfortable moving forward with this as an effort. If you have worked with LEED for Buildings, this table probably looks fairly familiar to you. This is essentially the scorecard, the checklist that you could use to track your progress. It's pretty small. I'm not going to go through it in all of the details, but you can kind of see that there are essentially 7 really main categories of evaluation that LEED for Cities uses. You've got integrative process, which really looks at kind of how we're structuring the work and gets into some of the incentives that we have in place for green building policies. We have natural systems and ecology, which is really looking at how we're protecting and maintaining our unbuilt environment. The transportation and land use category gets into a lot of the details around the built environment and how we're interacting with that in a more sustainable way. A big section on water efficiency, where we're looking at access, quality, and some of the kind of management structures that are happening in our water and wastewater and stormwater systems to kind of be a little more effective and efficient. Energy and greenhouse gas emissions, which you can see is the largest of all the categories in Lead for Cities. It's 30 possible points available there. Materials and resources, which looks at the entirety of our waste management process. And then, as I mentioned, that quality of life section, which really looks at how we're doing on a series of trends. And interestingly enough, has a very strong emphasis on distributional equity and environmental justice. Those kind of weave themselves through all of the different quality of life categories that we take a look at. Another thing we really liked about Lead for Cities is that it recognizes that they don't have all of the answers. There is no one size fits all approach to sustainability. So they have these two additional categories, innovation and regional priority. And these are for communities that are doing things that are kind of out of the box or a little bit more creative around the sustainability space. So what are we doing here locally that maybe can be applied in other places? We've had some discussions as we've gone through the certification process about some of the innovation credits that we're submitting to support this potentially becoming credits longer term. So they're open to changing the scoring structure based on what they learn and context. They've added some COVID response credits this year. So it's a very flexible system once you look at those innovation and regional priority credits as well. So where are we in the process? Cleveland was one of 20 cities in 2020 that was awarded a technical assistance grant to help us kind of navigate through there. We had trainings and they're waiving the certification fee. And due to COVID, even though we've moved out of 2020, we're still able to access that support. We've really structured our work into two phases. Phase one is really focused on certification. This really is where we start to document our as-is conditions, kind of pull all of that data together, and then compile and submit our application. We've done that part, so we're through that initial phase one. We've gotten a little bit of feedback on some of our initial phase submissions, and we're kind of doing some follow-ups that they've asked us to do to clarify a few things. And then once we get that certification back, we'll move into phase two, which is where we really look to optimize our efforts. So it's in phase two where we're going to take a look at the lessons that we can learn through the process, whether it's through our own analysis, a little bit of gap analysis work that we did as we kind of went through this, the feedback that we're getting from the USGBC and the reviewers, and are really looking to identify the policy and programmatic changes that are necessary to really move us towards that platinum certification. So I mentioned we've kind of gotten through the bulk of phase one. We're kind of hopeful that maybe in the next month or so, we'll have a final certification level and we'll be able to share that publicly. But it's something that we're pretty excited about and I think is going to really help us kind of set the framework for future action as we look to kind of advance our sustainability agenda. So shifting gears a little bit, the second project that I thought we should really kind of spend a little bit of time is our Circular Cleveland initiative. Like Lead for Cities, this is another project that has been in various stages of development for about a year now. Last April, we got notice that the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation was putting out a funding opportunity tied to the intersection of climate change and health. If you're not familiar with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, they are a health-focused foundation. And this was, I believe, the first pot of sustainability funding that they had ever opened up. From our perspective at the city, the timing of this was really good. At that point, we were really kind of coming to grips with the reality of the changes that was coming to our recycling efforts. And we were getting ready to kind of launch this full-scale evaluation of our waste management process, which is the report that we recently completed. And we viewed this grant as an opportunity to do something innovative and really expand the conversation and work around waste management to include a broader set of long-term solutions, right? I think we can all recognize that we're not going to recycle our way out of our waste management problems. So we need to look at other more circular solutions to kind of inject some creativity into how we do this. So in light of this, we got together with Cleveland Neighborhood Progress, who was really the other big driving organization behind this locally, and then linked up with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation to put together a grant application that we titled our Circular Cleveland Advancing Health Equity and Climate in the Great Lakes. If you're not familiar with Ellen MacArthur Foundation, they are the global thought leader on circular economy. So they're a natural partner for this and have a ton of great information. And I think we can drop a link to their website in the chat. You can check some of that out as you have a little bit more time. We went through a very, very intensive evaluation process with Robert Wood Johnson that lasted for about 6 months. And at the end of that process, Cleveland and CNP in our application was one of 6 cities that were selected by Robert Wood Johnson to receive a grant. We were awarded a little under $500,000 out of $3 million that was available to launch this effort. We have a 24 to 30 month project outline. It's really divided into 2 phases, and we'll kind of see how that breaks out here in a second. We like this grant. It's going to fund a roadmap, and that's great. This grant is wonderful because it also has a significant portion of the funds for implementation. So in addition to taking this market scan and seeing what exists in our area and where we maybe need to grow and evolve a little bit, we also have a pretty significant pot of money available to fund some of these projects, and we'll kind of look at what those are here in a second. We've been working with Robert Wood Johnson for the past few months. They've already flagged a few things that they really like in our application. We have built an intentional focus on equity. So how do we really kind of take this to the grassroots and resident level? And then also, how are we looking to link it to global ideas? And when you talk about circular economy at a large scale, kind of taking it to scale beyond just businesses here and there, you really do have to look globally at places like Toronto, London, Milan. They're kind of at the front edge of this discussion. We're excited about this. When we think about it, this is going to help us kind of move from that linear economy where we take things, we make them into products, and then we dispose of them in some fashion, to a structure that is really more circular, where we're really looking to kind of make things, reuse them, remake them, and then as a last resort, hopefully recycle them if we can. Doing this is going to help us get to that kind of more environmentally sustainable community. It's going to hopefully create healthier communities and neighborhoods. And perhaps most importantly, if we do this right, we're going to create a tremendous amount of economic opportunity and wealth for our residents. As we've worked through what this project should focus on, we've established kind of 4 guiding principles for ourselves that we really want to focus on. One is obviously designing out waste and pollution. That's right at the forefront of what we want to do. We want to do that in a way by keeping products and materials in use longer to reduce waste, and using this as an opportunity to really start to regenerate natural systems and, of course, generate those economic opportunities and wealth for residents. We know that circular solutions have a much higher job creation potential than even recycling, and certainly more than incineration and landfilling. So this is kind of where we want to get to as we look at this from an economic development standpoint. The good news is we are not starting from scratch, right? There is quite a bit of good activity already happening in the circular space around our city and our region. We've got Habitat's Restore up here, and this is one great example of reuse and redistribution, but there's also a tremendous amount of really good work underway around biomimicry, regenerative farming, composting, refurbishment and remanufacturing, shared services and goods. So there's a lot of really good stuff happening in Cleveland already. We put a blog up about some of these already ongoing initiatives. I think we'll try to drop a link into the chat to that so you can kind of see some of the good work, if you're not familiar, that's already happening in Cleveland. So when we look at this initiative, there are some very specific deliverables that we have to deliver for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation under this grant. And I kind of referenced the Circular Cleveland Roadmap up front. This is really going to look at kind of that scan of the local market. We've already kind of gotten into the contract of this and have already started doing some of the data compiling for the consultant who's going to be completing this project for us. And we'll engage with other cities to kind of learn what they're doing and then what can be adapted in the Cleveland context. So what can we learn from other cities that we can bring back here that makes sense and that we can implement? But I think where we're most excited, and this is what kind of really got us interested in this grant, is the implementation funding. So coming out of the Circular Cleveland Initiative, we're going to be able to start a composting program at the West Side Market for vendors. So a tremendous amount of organic waste generated at the market. So we'll be able to kind of create some composting ability there. Hopefully that RFP will be published and out in the next couple of months. So we'll be starting the bid process to award that. We also have about $75,000 committed through this project from micro grants to community-based projects. So if you're familiar with the Cleveland Climate Action Fund projects that we funded through the last round of the climate action planning process in conjunction with Neighborhood Connections, we've got another pot of money to do that. A lot of the really innovative circular solutions are going to come from things that maybe aren't scalable yet. So we want to make sure we're investing in those. So you'll see about $75,000 for the micro grants to community-based projects. And then we also have $100,000 that we're going to really look to target to small business loans through our Department of Economic Development to really kind of advance some of these circular economy solutions that we want to bring to the table. I mentioned that we are hard at work on this one already. So we've already started on this. Here's a brief overview of the timeline. I'm not going to read the whole thing for you, but we are on schedule right now as we work through year one. We've gotten quite a bit of activity. We're working with EMF to join their network. The roadmap RFP has been issued and the contract has been awarded. So we're starting work on that roadmap process. And then we're working through the rest of these things. So stay tuned. There'll be quite a bit of opportunity for engagement, whether it's through our steering committee that we're looking to set up or various other community conversations that we want to host and have around this. So stay attuned to this one. This is going to be a big project that's going to last for a while, where we're going to need a lot of community engagement and support from all aspects of the community. All right, so I will shift gears one more time, and this is the last project we'll go through, and probably the one we'll spend the most amount of time on, because this is probably one of the bigger lifts that we've undertaken. Again, another project that's been in the works for about a year or so, but we recently completed what we've termed our Cleveland's Clean and Equitable Energy Future Report. I guess just with a little bit of context, and this group is probably familiar with this, so I'm going to go through this kind of quickly. Our climate action plan is at its heart really centered on this aggressive goal to reduce emissions 80% over a 2010 baseline by 2050. There's obviously a lot more in the cap, but that's really the heart of the document, is that emissions reduction. And we have made progress, right? So since we kind of launched our Sustainable Cleveland effort and really began tracking this, we have made improvements. We are seeing reductions in emissions over time. We're seeing decoupling, right? So the decoupling of emissions and economic activity at the local level. But as we think about how we get there on the path forward, recognizing that there still is quite a bit of work to be done on this goal, we have to have conversations about our energy use, because it represents a overwhelmingly large portion of our emissions profile in Cleveland. We're a little different than the national average. So you can see that energy use represents about half of our local emissions. So as we work through this in our climate action plan, we outlined 2 sub-goals that were directly related to this energy use necessity. One is to get 25% of our electricity used in Cleveland supplied by renewable sources by 2030. And then the second is to reach what we termed 100% of electricity demand from clean renewable sources by 2050. We have, as a city, spent a tremendous amount of time focused on the first of those, and we have made progress there, right? So we've got our supply side chart here. So this is really looking at the generation supply coming from both CPP and CEI, and then also our REC purchases. So if you look at that dark gray line, that's everything kind of rolled together. So what CPP is doing, what CEI is doing, and what we're able to get through some of our larger bulk REC purchase. You can see that we're about 13%. So we're about halfway to our goal. We're tracking, and this is really, progress is really reflective of some of the investment and the time we focused on this over the last few years. What we wanted to do was make sure that we were putting the same amount of attention on the second of those 2 sub-goals. So we went out, we secured funding from Partners for Places, the Gunn Foundation, Cleveland Foundation, the United Black Fund, and really put together a collaborative effort with folks who are working in this space, or just general subject matter experts who could help us support those existing efforts to get to this 100% electricity demand goal and then expand on it. So we contracted with a firm called GreenLink Analytics out of Atlanta. They really are a national leader on carbon footprint accounting and utility resource planning, and are really kind of the driving kind of resource that we use to develop this roadmap to get us to 100% clean energy. Equity has to be centered in that plan. We obviously wanted to focus on the environmental and the economic benefits that the transition could support, but we wanted to make sure we were using it as an opportunity to address energy equity as well. Whether we look at access to jobs or energy burden or a host of other measures, we know that locally we've got quite a bit of work to do here. So this map here, for example, shows energy burden, and we can kind of see how severe the problem is. Nationally, you generally see electric and gas spending account for about 3.6% of household expenditures. In Cleveland, it's much higher. It's about 6.5%. And beyond that, we have a large percentage of our population facing either high or even severe energy burdens. We had to keep equity at the forefront of that evaluation process, and you'll kind of see how we operationalize that here in a second. So we'll go through each of these in a little bit more detail in a second, but I wanted to highlight right up front, I think, the 3 big key takeaways from the report. First, we learned in this process that our ability to achieve our goal based on local action alone is constrained by state policy. In other words, I think for us to get where we want to go without more support or a different approach at the state level, it's going to be difficult. But having said that, even within those constraints, the transition to 100% clean energy can have a significant and positive impact on the key priorities that we build into our planning process. So improving energy equity, creating jobs and wealth for residents, improving human and neighborhood health. And then lastly, we've made progress. Like we've already kind of done some good things, and there are some things that we can do to help bring this to scale maybe a little bit more aggressively and quickly than we've been working at so far. So to kind of talk through those findings in a little bit more detail, I do need to spend a couple of minutes on the forecasting model that we used in this analysis. And I won't get too deep into the weeds in here for time purposes, and it gets very mathematical, very statistical very quickly, which I, as a reformed academic, I love, but not everybody loves that. But what GreenLink did here was they created what they termed their Advanced Clean Energy Scenario, or ACES tool, to model multiple pathways that we could follow to get to the 100% clean energy. This utilizes its data. It's a machine learning model of the electricity system that constructs these hourly electricity demand and supply profiles for the Cleveland grid, and then uses those profiles to forecast into the future. We didn't want a cookie cutter model, so they built us a Cleveland specific model. It uses 60 different building profiles found throughout Cleveland. So we're looking at differences in type, age, occupancy patterns, size, and then starts to build out from there, right? So then we start to look at the electricity supply model. So the operational characteristics, fuel prices, generation costs, and emissions and waste factors for all of the different power plants that could be used to generate electricity that comes into Cleveland. And then using that machine learning model, they kind of look to determine the price of the different kinds of resources and how much power that resource could provide into Cleveland's grid over time, right? So this allows us to look at things like solar, for example, where we know that solar is pretty much market competitive now, and we think that the price is going to continue to decline in the future. So that becomes a component of the analysis that GreenLink did for us to determine how much investment we should be looking at in solar compared to different other different clean energy strategies that we can pursue. So because of this, we were able to develop a pretty precise model that allows us to kind of look at multiple inputs. You can kind of see what they are here on the screen, and then kind of produce output models that account for benefits and costs, various environmental outcomes, the economic impact of action, what the impact on human health is going to be. And then I think from our perspective, as important as anything is what that transition would mean for energy equity more broadly. So we can use the model to kind of generate an infinite number of pathways. And as part of our contract, we have this model now. It's our product, so we can use it as we need to. But the report looked at 3 pathways in particular. So it looked at what we've termed the business as usual model, where the approach is to take no additional action beyond what we're doing right now. So basically stop all things that we're doing, just continue with what we've got, don't add anything else, and let the market determine where we go. The most cost-effective pathway is just where the benefit and cost ratio is the highest. And then the maximum pathway is where we do everything that is technically, financially, and legally feasible in Cleveland, Ohio to be done to advance our costs. The chart on the right shows that under each of those pathways, we do see a substantial change in the fuel mix, right? What we want to see is more light blue, which is energy efficiency gains, more orange, which is solar, and light gray, which is other renewables. And you can see in all 3 cases, those get well above the 13% that we see now in our overall clean energy profile. So here's the combined output table. This really helps us kind of understand what those major takeaways are. I'm not going to go through all of the numbers here, but it does help us kind of see what some of those benefits can be are. The ACES model is set to force us to get that 100% goal. Anything that we can achieve through local action is backed up by the purchase of renewable energy credits, right? So after we've done everything we can do locally, we fill the rest of the gap by purchasing RECs. While RECs are certainly a strategy that we can use, and we do use them in the city, from our perspective, it's not the optimal approach, right? We're outsourcing most of the environmental benefit. We're outsourcing all of the economic and the equity benefits as well. And that's just not where we want to be at the end of the day. When we started the project, I think we all were comfortable with the idea that without making substantial changes, we would need to purchase a lot of RECs. And you see that here under the business as usual scenario. where we're still buying 5 million renewable energy credits in 2050 to get that target. We were really excited as we moved through the project to like, we're going to get out of the rec business. We're going to dramatically move away from them as a tool. And I think what you see here is that's not really the case, right? Even in the maximum pathway, we're still purchasing about 3.5 million renewable energy credits. So we're seeing about a 30% reduction, which surprised us. And we pushed back on the consultants about this to better understand why. And they came back pretty clearly and said that the state level policy has not been supportive of clean energy or energy efficiency in recent years. And that is probably the biggest limiting factor that we see here. Now, this isn't anything earth-shatteringly new to this audience, but to see how it kind of plays out this clearly and this quantitatively was certainly eye-opening for us as we look at that. But like I said, even within those constraints, we can do some really good things. It's just the magnitude could be larger if we had more support. So what are those positive changes? Starting with energy equity, under all three pathways, we see that energy burden declines. And by the time we get out to that max pathway, we're well underneath the current national average. Now, that's going to change a little bit by market forces, but we're in a much better place. Percentages are kind of abstract. We can see bill savings, whether you're able to participate in the programs or whether you don't participate in the programs. Everyone can see generated bill savings under both the most cost-effective and the maximum pathway. We see substantial job creation as well. In the maximum pathway, we created a net increase of over 5,000 jobs. These are clean energy and energy efficiency jobs, which we know have higher wages than what we normally see in our region. So in our climate action plan, when we talk about good green jobs, this is what we're talking about. So we like to see that. And then lastly, we see some fairly substantial accrued health savings, right? This is largely from deferred negative health incidents, but some substantial public health savings that we can see over time from a variety of factors driving this. But a plan is only as good as what you do with it, right? So we need to think about how we translate this into action. So as a part of the report, we developed what we've termed our Clean Energy Policy Toolkit. It is a collection of about 70 different policies or programs that we can pursue locally to support our transition. I'm not going to go through all 70 of them here. I would encourage you to take a look at the report if you haven't done so. We'll drop a link in the chat there. But we analyzed each of these to assess the feasibility of it. So can we do it based on existing state laws, local policies? Does it make sense? Is it feasible? What would its overall carbon impact be? And then would it have a positive or potentially negative impact on equity? Because some of the policies actually would hurt equity locally. And we use this kind of ranking and assessment to really kind of prioritize action. We took a look at what has already been done, and this is critically important because as a community, we've done a lot already, and we should be very proud of that. The report kind of groups all of these actions by the ACE's input, but also who can move them forward, right? So not all of this is directly under the city's control because we commissioned the report. Most of what the report talks about are the things that the city of Cleveland, the capital C city, can do. But there are some of these that's going to require utility support or corporate support or broader community and institutional support. And those are outlined in the report as well. We've already, like I said, made some progress. 11 of them were already kind of in the implementation phase before we began this project. 12 there's another 12 that we've committed to as a city to pursuing. And then GreenLink recommends there's another 9 that we should pursue sooner rather than later. Again, not going to go through all of them. These are some of the strategies that we can pursue, all spelled out in the report. I think some of these things we're working on around building lighting and heat island. We're doing a little bit of a deeper dive on rounded up energy for energy and water conservation programs to make sure it's something that we can legally do under state law. We have clean energy and storage solutions. We do have an ordinance in front of council now that would allow us to put rooftop and ground mounted solar at up to 15 city facilities. It has battery storage to support some of our resiliency goals tied to those. We're also working very closely with council around a report that they produced regarding carport installations that we think is pretty intriguing. So we're kind of working through a whole bunch of things on here. And then transportation, again, we see some things that we can do. We're taking a look at the city fleet, for example, and what would it take for us to get to all of our light duty and passenger vehicles being EV, and what does that transition timeline look like? We're also working very closely with NOACA and the county to really think about how to bring charging infrastructure to scale, in particular in neighborhoods for us where the market may be a bit delayed. But as we talked about this, I mentioned that there are things that we need some help with, right? The city can't do all of this alone. So for us to get where we want to go, it's going to take more than just the city doing things. And I thought with this audience, I'd pull out a few of the specific actions that might be of interest to the group. Now, this is probably a little bit of preaching to the choir here, but I think since I've got everybody on a call here, I'm kind of obligated to make my pitch. So we pulled out some of the ones that I think are appropriate. And I'm not going to go through all of them again. These are all spelled out in the report with a pretty detailed kind of assessment of each one. But if we look at energy efficiency, GreenLink was very clear in flagging the importance of measuring and benchmarking performance as a critical first step, and having an organization that helps do that. And we're fortunate in Cleveland that we have the 2030 district that is already providing that service to a lot of our larger institutional and commercial properties. And I would imagine quite a few folks on this call are already participating in that program. But once you have that benchmarking ability, it just becomes easier to quantify and candidly to justify the upfront investment that may be required for energy and water efficiency that you need. In terms of clean energy, there are obviously a number of strategies that we can follow to get more renewables into our local market. Same thing with transportation. Look at your properties and your own fleets and say, are we doing enough to bring more EVs into our own fleets, our own portfolio? There are quite a few options that companies can pursue around incentivizing carpool transit ridership that can have a pretty big impact. And then look at your parking facilities, right? Are we offering charging options for employees? Could we add some to make it easier for them to kind of make that investment from a personal vehicle? So there's quite a bit of work that we all kind of need to think about and work on collectively to help us advance where we're going. With that, I'll stop. That's a lot. I kind of threw a lot out there. Cindy gave me an open microphone and some time to talk. And I just kind of get going sometimes, but so maybe we'll stop there. And I think Cindy, I'm more than happy to answer any questions that anybody may have about what we're doing, where we're going, and anything else.
Thanks so much, Jason. That was really a great presentation. Appreciate you sharing all that with us today. There's a lot going on. I don't know if you ever sleep.
It's getting harder and harder. I have this, and then I have 20-month-old twins at home. So, and a 6-year-old. So I find a few minutes here and there. Yeah, you've got a lot going on in your life for sure. But we will take questions in the chat. The Cleveland 2030 District Program Manager, Isabella McKnight, is on with us, and Isabella will be monitoring the chat.
Yes, so we've already got a few questions. We'll start with the first one. I recently attended a presentation by John Peterson of Oberlin College in which he discussed the development of feedback display dashboards that the community can actively engage with and see and understand real-time resource uses. It can be scaled for a single building, neighborhood, or entire city. Does the Clean and Equitable Future Initiative plan to implement a dashboard for the community to engage with?
It's a great question. I think it's something we're taking a look at, and how do we begin to collect that information in a way that we could display and share publicly, right? Like, we're in a bit of a unique position because we've got a lot of data that we can access through partnership with Cleveland Public Power, but that's individual account information, what that looks like. I think what we want to avoid doing is reinventing the wheel. And we've got community indicators that we can track over time. They're not real time. They're a little bit lagged to when data kind of is published and available. I think the best thing that we would recommend now is for facilities to begin to do this on their own, right? And really drill down into that facility level data through 2030 district and through other places that are kind of doing that, whether you're in 2030 district or you're not. You can look at Energy Cap, Portfolio Manager. There's a whole host of things you can use to do this. I think this came up as one of the potential recommendations in the report itself, but I think candidly, we're struggling a little bit with how we would do it at the city level. So it's not a great answer. It's not, I'd love to give you a yes or a no answer on that. We're trying to figure out what that might look like and what would be involved and how much effort it would take to get us there, and whether we can supplement it with something that exists that maybe is a better fit a little more quickly, if that makes sense.
Cool. Next, is nuclear energy included under the clean energy category?
It is not. We're looking at solar, wind, hydro, geothermal, pretty much everything, but no nuclear.
What is the status of the Cleveland microgrid plan of 2018 that included CPP, Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland Foundation, and Cleveland State?
It is still kind of working through kind of that back and forth process. I think our folks through our operations section, so Darnell Brown is our chief operating officer. Our folks in our public utilities department are really kind of spearheading that discussion with the county to figure out what's the right path forward and what does that look like. I don't know that we're necessarily at a place where there's a really tangible product or outcome that we can point to, but those conversations are still ongoing.
What is the status of the city's recycling program? Are you finding new buyers to get this back on track?
We are making progress on recycling. Yes, I would say right now there are 3 big tasks that are kind of ongoing, kind of simultaneously around recycling. So we got through the waste assessment. So we looked at not just recycling, but bulk collection, waste management, route optimizations, all those things in the broader waste management process for the Division of Waste. We're moving into implementation now. So from an implementation of a new recycling program, what we're looking at is obviously an opt-in program that will go from weekly curbside collection to bi-weekly curbside collection. And that transition does a couple of things for us. It helps us kind of lower some of the contamination rates, we think, but then also it allows us a little more flexibility to bring more frequent bulk collection, which tends to be a little bit more of a challenge in Cleveland with some of the bulk item set outs that we see in illegal dumping. So we're moving to an opt-in bi-weekly collection. So to get there, we've got 3 tasks that I think I would point to right now. And a couple things maybe I can ask for everybody on here's help with. We are bringing a recycling coordinator on board. That job is posted. I don't know if we can maybe drop a link to that job posting in the chat. We would love for everybody to share that because that's a really important position for us to fill and get somebody kind of here who can help kind of coordinate, spearhead, and drive some of those education efforts that we need to see. The other big thing that we've got going right now is we're starting to stand up the opt-in process. So we've got a web form that's in development right now that hopefully we'll be able to roll out and then link that up to residents who may not have digital access. We know we've got some digital divide challenges in Cleveland. So we're going to be putting that out in a way that hopefully we'll be able to capture that for folks who don't have broadband access or aren't comfortable filling out a web form. That hopefully is going to be live in the next few weeks or so. And then the third big thing we've got is getting a bid for a processor, right? So if we don't get somebody to take the materials, which I think is kind of implied in the question there, it's kind of all for naught. So we've got bid specs developed. We're looking at 2 options on those. One includes glass, one excludes glass as raw material. So we're going to see kind of what comes back from that bid process. Those specifications are under review now. I got to think that bid will be live very, very soon. It's a question of weeks, not months, before that bid is out and available to the public. We're looking at some dynamic pricing models. So we thought about waiting until we had the opt-in so we could get a price based on the expected volume, but we just didn't want to delay this too long. So we're going to ask for some dynamic pricing models in there to help us kind of get there. But we're running all 3 of those big tasks in conjunction with one another to get the program back as quickly as possible. But get it back as quickly as possible with a program that works, right? That's the most important thing for us is we don't want to have to go through this process again of trying to restart and reestablish the program. So we want to get it back quickly, but it needs to be the program that's going to work in the Cleveland context and can be scaled up over time to be successful.
We have a follow-up on the nuclear energy question. So what is the reason for nuclear energy not being considered for the project?
I think as we went through our climate action planning process, going back to 2013, I think we've always kind of focused on non-nuclear options. I think it is certainly one option that can be pursued. It has positives, it has negatives. It's just not something that we've included as part of our city options. As we've looked at this, we really want to look at those things that we can really look at and control from a solar and from a wind standpoint. I think it's one of those things we just haven't necessarily included historically.
So to go back to the recycling question, will the recycling program be only for single-family homes, or can apartment buildings and businesses opt in?
So it's going to follow the same eligibility rules as the old program and our general waste collection strategy. And it's tied to size of the residential facility, right? So I want to say it's 4 units or less, or it might be less than 4 units. I don't know. I'll get you the right answer to that, and we'll share it. And maybe Cindy, if you can help us kind of distribute that information out to the group so I can give you guys right information. But large multifamily buildings, the larger apartment structures, businesses, right now will not be able to opt into that program, but that's kind of similar to what we've done through the old program. It's going to follow pretty much the same eligibility rules initially. But if you are a resident, one of the things we are looking to do to address that, though, if you're a resident in a multifamily building, we're going to look to create drop-off centers where if your building doesn't offer it as a service and you want to recycle, we want to give you more options of places to take that. Right now, it's basically Ridge Road. We're looking at up to 6, what we call super centers, that will be able to handle all the recyclable materials, yard waste, bulk drop-off. So we're looking to create more options because we recognize that's a little bit of a gap. So we're working on that, but they won't be able to opt into this program right away.
Has the storm and emergency situation that happened in Texas impacted decisions and a path forward, specifically dealing with clean energy and energy storage?
Yeah, I think I don't know that I would say that specific incident has really moved or shifted our perspective, but I think it reinforces what we all know we need to do, right? We need to look at more, and it's a similar kind of philosophy to what we see with the circular economy work. The more we can bring generation here, local, clean, reliable, environmentally responsible generation local, the better off we're going to be. I don't think I can't say that we looked at that and that's why we moved this report and created these goals, because they've been in place much longer than that. But it highlights the need to do this, right? When we looked at our on-site solar project that we're working through right now, energy storage was critically important. We required it in the bid documents for folks to give us pricing for energy storage because we know that there's a resilience function to it, right? When we look at kind of how we react to severe storms and inclement weather and, colder snow events and polar vortexes, which seem to be coming more and more often, we need to have more resiliency baked into some of what we see at our rec centers, for example. So we're looking at rec centers as a potential location for solar with on-site storage options to help us do a little bit more resiliency planning and have a little bit more opportunity to embed that. So not a direct cause and effect, but certainly a great illustration of why we need to think about this.
You mentioned the 15-site CLE solar project. Any sense as to when City Council will approve that?
We're working through the process right now. It's different from what we've done in the past, right? So there's a lot of questions that we need to be able to answer about pricing and kind of the timing and the contracts of it. So we're working through that process, and I think hopefully, we'll be able to get some shovels in the ground eventually to build these projects. But we're kind of still working through what that timeline looks like.
Cleveland has an older housing stock, which typically means higher energy usage. Does the Clean and Equitable Future Initiative address upgrading the existing housing stock?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it does. And it's really about kind of how do we direct funding into some of these programs, and how do we start to think a little bit about those investments as not just kind of housing stock quality investments, but energy efficiency and energy burden investments. One of the challenges that we have is that the programs that fund these things are finite, right? There's limited resources to do it. So how do we start to get people aligned with the programs that can best benefit them? We've started, interestingly enough, and I think I could talk about this publicly. I don't know. We're working with a few other cities on some potential methods to do a better job of targeting properties, not just understanding when they have an efficiency problem, but also based on some time of day seasonality usage. Is it an envelope problem? Is it an HVAC problem? So that we can target outreach and engagement to certain programs for each of those get the right people to the right program so we can make sure we're most effectively utilizing those resources. But yeah, we have to absolutely think about housing stock in the way that it impacts both energy equity, but also water burden and water costs and water efficiency. So we've got to think about it all a little bit, from a holistic fashion.
Are you still entertaining bids or proposals for the solar projects?
The initial 15, we are not. Those bids are done. But we've always kind of envisioned this as a phase one. So kind of an initial step in the process. And then phase two would go through a separate RFP and bid process. So be on the lookout for that. We're hopeful as we work through some of this carport work that came out of the council report that we may be looking at a phase two that would tie in some of that work. It's a really interesting application because it takes these very large, reflective surfaces that create heat island effects and puts them into a more productive, more kind of absorptive function. So the 15 now, those are done. We can't do any more bids on those, but we're hopefully going to launch another round of projects maybe later this year.
So that's it. Those are all of the questions we have in the chat. If anyone has anything else they would like to ask, please put that in now. Okay, we got another one. You mentioned lack of support from the state. What is the outlook for that to improve? Are there any allies that this work has at the state level?
Oh, wow, man. I think we've got work to do, and I think you're seeing a flurry of activity through various state bills that are both supportive and not supportive, and so it's tough to read the tea leaves a little bit in terms of what's happening down there. I think there are some things that we can look back and look at that would be helpful and that we would like to see, right? So and this isn't a House Bill 6 issue. This goes beyond House Bill 6. It goes back farther. We can see things around setback rules for wind and, all of these different things. So, I think, I think it's a mixed bag right now. I think we've got to see how this plays out. We've communicated with the state some of our concerns, and hopefully we'll be able to move to a more kind of more renewable friendly approach. I think that's to be determined on that one, I guess would be my answer.
And then following up on that, what changes to state policy would have the most impact on the city's ability to meet its clean energy goals while minimizing REC purchases?
Yeah, I think there's some very specific ones. And these are, again, these are spelled out in the report. So I would encourage you to take a look through there. But bringing back and reinstating that energy efficiency and renewable portfolio standards at the IOUs, right? So that kind of got unwound a little bit, and limiting the ability to opt out of those. Really putting energy efficiency into long-term IRP at the state utility, at the investor-owned utility level. Streamlining permitting interconnection process for larger utility scale renewable development. So what does that look like? One of the things that we found in our report is, community solar, right? So really making community solar, using the virtual net metering process, creating that through a regulatory framework to make that more predictable. That would have a big impact on distributed generation, particularly in a city like Cleveland, where our housing stock, to one of the earlier questions, is a little bit older, and not every house is going to be a candidate to put rooftop solar on for a variety of reasons. Community solar is a great option to do that, to localize those benefits, create wealth, but we need virtual net metering agreements, the ability to do that. And that's not, that we haven't gotten a lot of traction on that. Make it easier to share data and to understand kind of what's happening with investor-owned utilities. And it can be things as simple as around electric vehicles, because that has a big impact on some of our modeling and what we saw some big gains around transportation. So adopting kind of more EV friendly policies and programs, looking at some of the mandates and incentives around that. Changing, it's as simple as changing the registration fee. I think if you register an electric vehicle, it's a $200 registration fee. If you have a regular vehicle, I think it's $55, something like that. So it's a mix of things. I think there's a whole host of different policies that would help us kind of advance this a little bit more effectively. And if we could make that progress, then that calculus about the purchase of RECs changes a little bit. And we can start to keep some of those benefits local and create more wealth for residents. And that's what we want to try to do through this activity.
All right, it looks like, oh, okay, we just got another one. Lake Erie and the Cuyahoga River are two of the city's biggest assets and resources, yet there is very little opportunity for residents to actually engage with the water. A population more engaged with their resources is more likely to care about them. Does the city have plans to increase public access and recreational opportunities on the lake and the river?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that start to come to fruition about increasing access and kind of making those connections. Yeah, I think some of the trail work that we've brought live is obviously going to do that. We're pretty well into the vision for the Valley planning process, which Director Collier from City Planning is kind of spearheading locally here, but we're also working with Metro Parks and a whole host of others with the CHEERS program, which CHEERS is an acronym that I should know what it stands for, but it's really looking at some of those east side connections and repurposing some of that east side lakefront property to a more kind of public and accessible fashion. So yeah, it's a great question. And I think we're moving in that process. And I think the more we can connect people to the lake, to the river, and make them aware about it, the better off we're all going to be. And it fits in well with some of the things we're trying to do around green space access more generally at the city, about trying to make sure people can connect to those resources to just have a higher and improved kind of neighborhood quality of life experience. So.
All right, we'll give just a few more seconds for people to get any last questions in.
And so maybe while we're waiting for a final question, we've got one or 2 minutes left here. Jason, thank you so very much. What a great presentation. We really appreciate you being here today. And in the last minute, and I'll just throw this out, if you had one plea to make to commercial building owners, because we've got many of those on the line, to help the city achieve its clean energy goals, what's your plea? And how does 2030 help you do that?
Wow, I only get one. You know what? I think what we learned in our report process is really the ability to make significant energy efficiency gains, both at the residential level, but also at the bigger user level, right? So I think we could see up to 28% reduction just from efficiency gains, right? So finding ways to bring more energy efficient usage into your property, whether that's traditional energy efficiency methods, looking at water efficiency in your facility and finding ways to reduce your water usage to lower the electricity cost of pumpage for so like these are I don't want to say they're easy things because sometimes they're not, but I think that's just a great place to start, right? It's much simpler than saying, all right, I'm going to build a solar canopy on my office building, or I'm going to convert my parking lot to this. Those are capital expenses that take more time. Those efficiency programs internally to buildings can have a huge impact. And it kept coming up as we did our deep dive on that program toolkit with Green Lake. Efficiency gains. It kept coming up over and over and over again. And you'll kind of see how that, as you read through the report, you'll see the relative distribution of efficiency in terms of available policies and programs kind of dwarfs everything else. But I would actually say do it all. Don't do one, do everything. But if you have to do one, start there.
Yeah, thank you. And of course, great advice and right in line with our wheelhouse. Obviously, that's what we advocate all of our buildings do. So we are right at 1 o'clock. And so thank you again. Thanks everyone for participating. You'll be getting a couple of emails from me shortly, one for your education credit sign up. And again, just a really quick survey. Give us some ideas for other topics for these sessions. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll see you next time.